Hi everyone, today I'm going to be showing you how to make these little flowers. Now these are wafer paper and I will put some pictures of them up so you can see them a little closer. But these are kind of a watercolor effect flower and they're very simple to make. You have to use what wafer paper will do for you to your advantage because it sticks to itself, and you don't need to use wires to make these. They're very quick because they're wafer paper, they dry fast. And I'm going to be using some petal dust and some pre-printed watercolor wafer paper, which I have here. There's a few different colors, and I do sell these in my shop, so I'll put the link in the description of the video. But if you start with the watercolor paper, I kind of like this better than starting with white. This one is an example of one that was started with white, and I just used the petal dust to color it. It's okay, but I like the depth of color that the watercolor paper gives it. So when you start with a color that's already printed, you can add the petal dust to it to give it a little extra color. But it just, even for one that's a very light color, let me hold this up closer, you can see that it gives it kind of a nice range of color if it has that color printed on it to begin with in the background. So I'm gonna start with these. I'll do some hydrangeas today. I did have some, the larger ones are made with die cutters, but I'm gonna start with some of these just to show you how to do this. It's very easy, it's very quick, and let's get started. All right, the tools that I'm using for these, obviously I have the paper, I have my little spray bottle of vodka, and you can use water, it just will take longer to dry. I do have a little container of vodka in case I need to brush some on with the paintbrush, which I'm using a small paintbrush also. I have 2 paper punches, so I'm going to use the hydrangea and a daisy. I do have a center mold, and I did a video about how to make daisies. I think I showed you how to do that, but I'll show this again. But for these little tiny ones, you don't even need a center mold. You just need to get a little dot of wafer paper and put that on there, and I'll show you how to do that in a bit. I also have 2 colors of petal dust. I'm just going to be using a pink and a purple just for this demonstration. And I'm going to be using my hands, so I have a damp paper towel and a dry paper towel. And you can see that my hands have stuff all over them. That's just what happens when you do work with your hands. It's going to have stuff on them. All right, so first I'm going to cut out a bunch of these little hydrangeas. And some daisies. I'll just do a couple of these. All right, now to make the flowers, the first thing is you're going to attach 2 layers of flowers together. This is very easy, and like I said, you can use white paper for this, but I just like the way that having a pre-printed color on it to begin with looks. So you're just going to take this and put a tiny dot of the vodka in the middle. Again, you can use water, but the vodka will dry a lot faster. And then you want to overlap these so that the petals overlap and they're not exactly the same, because that'll give it a little bit of depth. I forgot to add, I do use a flower former, and I'm going to put that on there to dry so that it dries kind of in a cup shape. And I'm just going to leave that there for just a minute. Okay, I'm going to continue on and attach all of these flowers together. So it's very simple again. Dot in the middle. Then you're going to take this one, take this one and overlap it here. And you can see that the petals are overlapping. They're not exactly the same, and that will give it some fullness and make it look a little bit more three-dimensional. And then you're going to put it in the flower former and just let it sit there to dry. Okay, do the same thing with the other flowers. Now make sure that you're putting the colored side up and that you are overlapping this. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Obviously this one did not line up perfectly. That's okay. You can either move it around or not. And I'm not using any kind of a wafer paper conditioner with this. The vodka, the moisture in the middle, these flowers are so small, so the moisture is going to make them kind of fold up anyway. So I'm just going to put this in the flower former and let it dry. All right, I'm going to kind of try to clean my hands off a little bit, because when you're touching the printed paper, it will come off on your fingers. Not such a big deal, but for the next step, you kind of want to be able to have the colors not smear all over each other. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this, I have a spoonful of Crisco. This is semi-important. It might help, you might not need it, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the petal dust and I'm going to put some of the Crisco on my fingers, just my finger and my thumb, and just kind of get that there. I'm going to grab one of these flowers, and then I'm going to kind of rub the Crisco on the petals of the flower. And you can do this before you put the flowers together. I prefer doing it this way just because you kind of get better control over what it looks like when it's put together. Plus, if you have shortening in the middle, it might not stick to itself. So you want to make sure that the flowers are stuck together before you start doing the layering of the color. All right, I'm going to dry my hand off. I'm going to wipe the Crisco off. Now I'm taking this and I'm just going to dip my finger in that just a little bit. So I have a little bit of pink on my finger and I'm just going to smear that on the flower and just kind of rub it in until I like the way that it looks. And sometimes you have to pull the petals apart a little bit, do that. You want to start light because if you have too much on your finger, it's going to really rub into the flower. Okay, so now you can see I've really taken this. I've put a lot on this petal, so I might want to, it doesn't look that bright. Oh, I see what it is. See, this is a second petal underneath it. So to make that a little less noticeable, I'm just going to pull that apart and kind of rub it on that one too. And it won't be as drastic a change, but that's fine. So I've got this one and I'm going to put this back in the flower former and let it dry. All right, I'm going to do the same thing to these. I'm going to get a little Crisco first, just a little bit. I don't want a big wad of it. And then I'm going to put this on the petals. What this does is it makes the wafer paper a little bit more flexible, and it also gives the petal dust something to stick to. So you can try it without the shortening. That's perfectly fine also. But I'm just going to take a little tiny bit on my finger and maybe put it on the edges. That just kind of enhances the color. It gives it a little bit more dimension, and that's all you need to do. So let me do some of the lavender here. This is African violet color, and this one is flamingo, in case you're looking for those colors. Now I want to be careful with this one because it's a little dark, and see I have it on my finger. I'm just going to kind of rub it on here. And I don't necessarily want it all over the petals. I just want to put some on the edges and kind of give it that look on the edge, like it's a little bit darker on the edge. And then once it comes off of your fingers, you can get a little bit more forceful with it. I mean, and then you can put some pink on it too if you wanted to do some more pink. I have a little pink on my finger. I'm just going to put a tiny bit on there and kind of rub that in. And this is just to give them a watercolor look. It's kind of a distressed look. If you're doing a cake that has a watercolor finish on it, these are really nice on those. Okay, and once your hand gets some color on it, you might not even need to put it in the Crisco because you've got the shortening on your fingers already. All right, so once you've added a little bit of color to that, I'm going to do the daisies. I think I'll do the daisies with the pink because these are not purple to begin with. All right, so I'm going to show this one. I'm just adding the pink to it. And I'm gonna rub this in. Just be gentle with these because sometimes you'll rip the petals right off, and I have done that before. It can happen. Okay, so now I've got the flowers kind of where I want them color-wise. And like I said, you can do that ahead of time. You can do this before you actually put the flowers together. But I like to do it this way just because then you can see what it looks like, and if you want to add some here or whatever, it's easier to tell what it's going to look like finished. Now we're going to make the centers for these. Now the centers, I'm going to take some of this. You can use white and then paint these yellow, that's okay. I'm just going to cut little pieces, and I'm not going to do centers for all of these, but I'll just show you how to do this. Just take a tiny piece of this, and it's little. See, you can barely see it. And you're going to take the vodka spray and just spray this and crumple it up. And as it gets crumpled up and wet, it's going to shrivel and dissolve on itself. It doesn't dissolve, it just gets mushy. And you're eventually going to end up with a tiny little ball that's right there. It's very sticky. And you can take the flower and you can put this right on it in the center, and then take a paintbrush or something and just poke this right into the center and just tap it down. It's sticky, it's going to stick to the wafer paper, and now you have a flower with a center. That's all that you need to do to make the centers for these. If you want to make these wired, you can. This is a lot easier because you don't have to worry about wires. The whole thing is completely edible, and you can go back and paint these yellow if you want to, and that's what I did with the other ones. I did this one yesterday using blue paper. I put the little center on there and then painted it yellow. So you can do that if you want to. If you start with yellow wafer paper, you don't need to do that. It just gives it a little bit of detail, and it just makes it look a little nicer. If you want to make a center to put in the daisies, you can use any center mold. This one is meant to be for daisies, so it has that texture to it. I'm just going to take some more of this paper just to demonstrate. Now you can either cut out circles. I don't find that that's necessary because the wafer paper just gums up on itself. Spray the inside of the center mold so that it has a little liquid in it. Again, I use vodka because it evaporates fast. You can use water. Just press this in there. And depending on how large you want it, you can kind of gum this up. You can put more in it. If you have wafer paper scraps after you've cut out petals and that kind of thing, just save them and you can make the centers this way. And this is just wet and mushy, but if you press down on it, it has the texture of the center, and I'm sure you probably can't see that. It's very subtle, but it has a daisy center, and because it's wet, you can just take the flower and put it directly on there. Grab a paintbrush and you can position it while it's still wet. And this is really bright orange, so I don't know that this would normally be my choice for a color. But when that dries, it's going to stick direct, I mean it's doing it now, it's going to stick to the flower. And you can put it in the former and dry it so that it's cupped, and that way when it dries, the petals probably will still stay up a little bit. So that's a simple way of making the wafer paper flowers that are small, and you can put them on cupcakes or cakes without worrying about the wires because there are none in them. They're completely edible. They're fast, and you can start with the white paper. I prefer the watercolor wafer paper. I'll put a link in the description of this video just because it does give it some extra color.